The glass gleamed under the amber light and the murmur of dinner voices moved like a slow tide through the room. Mira Solis stood near table 9, her hands trembling just enough that she hid them behind the linen napkin folded into a perfect square. Her heart beat against her ribs as if it wanted to be heard over the piano drifting from the corner. The napkin carried 8 words written in fading blue ink, and each one felt heavier than the wine she poured into his glass. Next table, he kidnapped me. Don't react. The man at table 9 raised his eyes just once and the world went quiet. Salvatore Vale looked older than the rumors that followed him, yet his presence filled the air like the smoke from the cigar resting beside his plate. A legend carved in whispers, a man who ruled silence as others ruled cities. He saw the napkin, he saw her hand release it, and he understood. Mira stepped back before her captor could notice the exchange. The music returned to her ears, the clinking of silver returned to life. She turned away to fetch another bottle, pretending to be just another waitress in the expensive heart of Chicago. Evan Rourke came back from the restroom with his sleeves rolled, and a smile too neat to trust, his voice soft but threaded with command. He asked if she had missed him. She answered yes, because it was easier to lie than bleed in front of strangers. He touched her wrist just hard enough to leave the ghost of his thumb there, the ring on his finger cold against her skin like a shackle. She wondered if Vale had already forgotten her face or if he would pretend not to have seen. The room smelled of truffle and bourbon. The violinist bent into a slow, sorrowful tune. Time crawled through every course and every glance felt like walking on glass. Vale ate with the patience of a priest. His men spoke little, their knives cutting meat like punctuation marks to a story only they knew. Myra's breath stayed shallow, the air thick with fear and perfume. Rourke leaned closer, whispered something about leaving town tomorrow, about new friends and new promises. She nodded because no sound could save her now. The waiter came again, and in that narrow moment she saw Vale fold the napkin twice and slide it into his jacket as if tucking away a confession. Her pulse stumbled. Maybe he would help, maybe he would deliver her to the same darkness. He owned the evening. Stretched. Vale paid the bill with the faintest tilt of his hand. He rose, his coat brushing the chair, his face unchanged. Mira dared to look up one more time and caught his gaze. In those 2 seconds she read nothing and everything, mercy or doom she could not tell. Then he walked out, his footsteps slow, deliberate. The door closed behind him, and the echo left her colder than before. Rourke finished his drink. He told her to smile. He called her darling loud enough that the nearby table looked away. Outside the window the streetlights bled gold into the wet pavement. Rain began its sermon against the glass. The city washed its sins again. They left the restaurant under that rain. Vale's car still parked across the street, his driver smoking beneath an umbrella. The driver saw her 2 eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. Mira felt them both watching as she stepped into the black sedan Rourke had borrowed under another name. The engine coughed, and the tires hissed away into the mist. She thought she saw Vale move behind the curtain of rain. Maybe it was only the reflection of a ghost. Downtown slipped by like a blurred photograph. Neon lights smeared on the windshield. Rourke spoke to someone on the phone, a voice thick with static and orders. She heard only fragments. Cargo schedule, river docks, midnight. Her stomach turned. She pressed her palms together, praying in silence. The city swallowed them whole. In a quiet street near the river, he parked beside a warehouse, rusted doors, graffiti walls, puddles that mirrored the yellow lamps above. He told her to stay put. She nodded again when he vanished. Inside she pulled the door handle, but it would not move. Locked from the outside, she sat in the dark listening to her own breath until it started to sound like someone else's. Minutes or hours later the door opened, and he came back carrying a duffel bag smelling of diesel and iron. He threw it on the seat, smiled at her, as if she were a trophy that had stopped shining. Back in the restaurant, Vale sat in his office above the kitchen of his own club. A mile away the napkin unfolded on his desk, the handwriting small, nervous, female. His advisor asked what it meant. Vale said nothing. He lit another cigarette and watched the smoke climb into the ceiling light. He remembered a photo in a newspaper years ago, a girl missing from the south side. Same terrified eyes. The world had taught him that silence saves lives, but tonight it tasted bitter. He picked up the phone, called his driver, asked for the plates of the sedan that left after him. Mira tried to sleep, but the car moved again. She could feel bridges passing above the wheels. She whispered her name over and over, not to forget who she was. Mira Solis, age 24, daughter of no one important. Her father used to fix boats on Lake Michigan before the water took him. Her mother faded in a hospital hallway, the kind that smells of bleach and regret. Nobody would look for her, nobody, except maybe the man who had looked at her once and folded a napkin like a prayer. Vale's driver returned at midnight, rain still falling. He handed the boss a photograph taken by the security at the restaurant entrance, the sedan license clear. Vale looked at it long enough for his cigarette to die between his fingers. Then he stood, no word, just motion. His men followed because that was the rule. The family moved like a single shadow across the city. In the warehouse near the river, the lights flickered. Mira heard footsteps and voices arguing. She tried to make out words. They sounded like numbers and names, a transaction written in her fear. Rourke laughed, the kind of laugh that leaves a scar on air. She closed her eyes and waited for morning that might never come. Vale's car stopped a block away. He watched through the windshield the reflection of the warehouse in the water below the bridge. The rain softened to drizzle. He told his driver to wait alone. He walked toward the rusted door, his coat collecting the rain like a second skin. The city seemed to hold its breath. Inside somewhere a woman prayed for someone to remember. A folded napkin. The door creaked and shadows bent. The door gave way with a tired groan, and the air inside carried rust and gasoline and the faint perfume of fear, the kind that lingers when someone knows there is no morning. Vale stepped into the hollow space, his shoes silent on the concrete. The rain whispered against the roof like distant applause. One bulb flickered above a table where the remnants of a deal lay, half-finished empty glasses, a map, a small pistol left careless, the sound of footsteps somewhere deeper inside, voices, low and tense. Rourke arguing with another man about payment, about a name that meant nothing to Vale yet everything to the city. He stayed in the shadow and listened, every word sliding into his memory like a blade into its sheath. Mira sat against a post, her wrists bound with duct tape, her head bowed. She looked like she had already disappeared inside herself. The world had become the hum of the fluorescent light and the beat of her pulse. She thought about the napkin, the hand that took it, the moment that felt too small to matter. She wondered if it would die with her. Like every other hope she ever had, Vale moved closer, each step an act of judgment. The second man left through the far door, muttering about the docks. Rourke stayed alone, rearranging papers and whispering to himself about money, enough money to vanish across the border. He turned and saw a shadow move behind him, but too late. The butt of a pistol met his skull with a dull sound. He fell to his knees, the world spinning. Vale caught him by the collar, lifted him just enough to speak, though no words came. His eyes did the talking, a long unbroken stare that stripped the man bare. Rourke tried to laugh, asked who the hell he was, but Vale pressed the gun under his jaw and the laughter drowned in breathless silence. He looked around and saw the girl in the corner, her eyes wide, not believing what they saw. The man from the restaurant, the ghost from another world, standing here like judgment itself. Vale cut the tape with a pocket knife, her hands trembling free. She whispered something that never made it to sound. He nodded once, no comfort, only recognition. He took her arm, guided her toward the door, his men already moving outside, one at the entrance, one by the cars. Everything timed, everything measured. Rourke still on his knees, blood mixing with rainwater dripping through the broken roof. As they stepped into the street, the city greeted them with wind and sirens from far away. Vale opened the car door for her and told her without words to get in. She obeyed, not knowing if this was rescue or another kind of captivity. The door shut, the car rolled away through the sleeping industrial district. In the back seat, she watched the neon signs slide across the window like ghosts of colors she once knew. Vale sat beside her, staring ahead, his face carved from old grief. She wanted to ask why he helped, but her voice refused to exist. The driver took them through alleys that smelled of wet iron and forgotten sins until they reached a building with no name. Inside a quiet room, she found warmth for the first time in days, a lamp, the hum of a heater, a towel on the chair. She washed her hands, the water turning gray. She looked in the mirror, saw a stranger with her eyes, her skin bruised, her mouth trembling. She touched her reflection and whispered thank you, though she did not know to whom. In another room, Vale poured a drink, his fingers steady, but his mind somewhere far behind. The years replayed a memory, a young girl missing from a park, a poster fading under the sun, the police closing the file after 6 months. His wife leaving the house silent forever. He had learned to bury ghosts, but sometimes they clawed back up through the concrete. Tonight one found him wearing another name. He sat at the desk, the napkin unfolded beside the glass. He stared at the ink, the curve of the letters, the fear in every line, and he felt the same ache that had haunted him since the night he failed to protect his own blood. He took out an old rosary, half broken, kept for luck or guilt. Maybe both. He placed it on the napkin and closed his hand around both. Mira could not sleep. The city outside sounded like it was breathing in pain. The wind moaned through the window frame. She lay on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of smoke and leather. She thought of her mother, of the morning she would make coffee before work, of the way she would say miracles are just debts being repaid. She wanted to believe this was one of them. She wanted to believe the man in the next room was human enough to care. Before dawn, Vale left orders for his men to find the other name from the warehouse, the one Rourke had said on the phone, a buyer or maybe a handler, someone called Bishop. The family owed him nothing, but the city did. Vale planned to return that debt with interest. At sunrise, the skyline bled gold over the lake, the streets below glimmered like veins of metal. Mira stood by the window watching light touch the world that had nearly ended for her. She felt hollow but alive, and in that emptiness something began to grow, like a seed of defiance or maybe faith. She whispered the napkin words again. Next table. He kidnapped me. Don't react, as if repeating them could erase the terror and turn them into power. Vale entered the room, coat over his arm, the cigarette between his fingers, trailing a slow ribbon of smoke. He nodded at her, said they had to move. She followed down the stairwell out to the waiting car. The day cold and clean, the air smelled of rain and iron behind them. The city woke without noticing, 2 lives rearranged in Its shadow. They drove toward the river where the warehouses lined up like silent jurors. Vale spoke at last, told her she was safe for now, but safety was a temporary lie. He said it without emotion. She understood there were no saviors in his world, only choices. He asked if she remembered any numbers from Rourke's call. She recited a few, and he memorized them the way a priest memorizes confession. Then he told her to rest. The car crossed the bridge, sunlight flickering through the girders, the water below carrying secrets away. Vale closed his eyes for a moment, saw the face of his lost daughter, then saw Mira beside him, the resemblance not in the features but in the eyes, the same unbroken will. He wondered if the universe ever stops demanding penance. He doubted it. As the city shrank behind them, he reached into his coat and pulled out the napkin once more. He unfolded it, laid it on his knee. The ink had bled from the rain, but the words remained. He touched them gently, then let the wind from the open window take the paper. It fluttered out over the river, spinning down until the current swallowed it whole. The city did not sleep, it only pretended. Vale knew that truth better than anyone. The streets shifted faces at dawn. The law turned its eyes away, and the river carried both gold and corpses with equal patience. He sat in the back of the car while the driver steered toward the southern docks where the wind smelled of oil and regret. The skyline behind them bruised with smoke. Mira dozed beside him, her head against the window, her reflection floating in the glass, half alive, half memory. Vale watched her for a moment, thinking how fear changes people. It burns away vanity, it leaves only instinct and raw truth. She had that look now, the same look his daughter once wore before she vanished. He lit another cigarette, the first inhale like fire in his lungs. He told the driver to stop near the pier. The fog rolled over the water, hiding ships that were more rumor than trade. He stepped out, the wind clawing at his coat. His shoes echoed across the wood. He saw a man waiting, leaning against a crate. His name was Dom Carano, an old associate who knew everything that moved through the port. Vale had saved his life years ago, and that debt was never forgotten. Carano told him about Bishop, a name whispered in the underworld, a broker between law and crime. He arranged disappearances, sold people like numbers on a list. He operated under police protection from a safe house near the freight yard. Vale listened without reaction, his eyes fixed on the river. When the talk was done, he simply said, "Find him," and walked away. Back in the car, Mira had woken, her eyes searching his face for meaning. She asked what would happen now. He did not answer. Instead, he looked through the windshield as if the road ahead contained confession. The silence stretched long enough to feel like punishment. She turned her gaze back to the window, the world outside moving too fast for her to follow. They stopped at a safe apartment above a bakery where the smell of bread fought against the stench of smoke. Vale left 2 men to guard her. He told them nothing except that if she vanished they would too. She sat on the couch watching rain streak down the window glass, listening to the city grind its teeth below. That night Vale met with an old priest in a small chapel. The candles burned, low shadows dancing like sinners across the walls. The priest greeted him with tired eyes. He had seen this man too many times always before the storm. Vale confessed without words, just a look. The priest understood. He told him that vengeance was a prayer without faith, and that it always returns to its maker. Vale nodded and dropped a folded envelope on the altar. Money, names, penance. When he left the church, the streets were silent. His car waited under a lamppost. His driver said they had traced Bishop to a club on Halstead, a place for politicians to play gangster and gangsters to play politician. Vale smiled faintly and said, "Then we will visit the theater." Mira could not sleep. She kept seeing Rourke on the floor, the sound of the blow, the silence after. She wondered if he was dead or locked somewhere waiting for judgment. She wanted to believe that justice had a face, but she had seen too much to trust that dream. She walked to the window, looked down at the wet street below, and saw a man standing in the corner watching the building, his hat low, his hands hidden in his coat. She stepped back, her heart drumming. The shadows moved like living things. Hours later, Vale returned, his coat damp from the drizzle, his expression unreadable. He told her to get ready. They were leaving. She hesitated, asked why. He only said it was safer to keep moving. They left through the back door, his men scattered like ghosts covering exits. The bakery owner pretending not to notice anything strange. The drive to the north side was long and silent. The rain turned to mist. The city stretched like an endless confession. Vale stopped near an old theater converted into a club. Lights blinking weakly through the fog. He told her to stay in the car. She wanted to protest, but the words never formed. He disappeared through the side entrance, 2 guards nodding him inside. Inside, the air was thick with jazz and cigarette smoke. The crowd glittered with money, and Sin Bishop sat in a private booth surrounded by uniforms and businessmen, each one thinking he was untouchable. Vale approached like a shadow, his steps merging with the rhythm of the bass. He stood at the table. Bishop looked up, ready to smile, then froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. Vale leaned down, said something only Bishop could hear. The man's face drained of color. He tried to speak, but Vale's hand rested on his shoulder, heavy as fate. Then he walked away, leaving a silence more terrifying than gunfire outside on the street. He signaled his men. 2 cars peeled off into the fog. When Vale returned to the car, Mira looked at him with questions she would never ask. His eyes were darker than before, like windows into a Storm, he said nothing, just told the driver to move. As they crossed the bridge, she glanced back and saw smoke rising from where the club had been, faint orange blooming through the fog. She closed her eyes and said nothing. The car rolled through the sleeping city into the outskirts where warehouses lined the road like tombstones. Vale told the driver to stop. He stepped out, lit a cigarette, the glow reflected in the puddles. He looked at the horizon where the first pale light of morning fought through the haze behind him. Mira sat in silence, her thoughts tangled between gratitude and fear. She wondered if the man who saved her had done it out of mercy or memory. He finished the cigarette, dropped it into the water, watched it die. He whispered something that the wind carried away, maybe a prayer, maybe a name. Then he got back in the car. The tires splashed through the puddles, the road stretching forward like a promise and a curse behind them. The city kept its secrets. The napkin was gone, the words faded, but the story was only beginning. The morning came quiet but heavy, the city pretending peace as sirens slept under bridges. Vale watched from the hotel window, his reflection, a stranger behind the glass. The world below moved slow, men opening shops, children running through puddles, all unaware of the blood that had bought their silence. He turned away, poured coffee, let it cool untouched. Mira still asleep on the couch, her body wrapped in borrowed calm. He wondered how long before the past found them again, because it always does. He left a note, told her not to leave, then stepped into the hallway, his men waiting, their faces blank, marble statues of loyalty. He gave orders short and final. The name Bishop was off the board, but Bishop was never one man, it was a system of favors, a network of ghosts, and the next name on the list was louder. At the police precinct, Captain Hale read the report, smoke rising from his cigarette. The club fire, the missing suspect, the witnesses gone. He had seen this pattern before. He knew whose shadow it was. He told his officers to keep their hands clean, but his eyes betrayed hunger. There was always a price on power, and someone would pay it today. In the streets, whispers traveled faster than cars. Bishop gone, Vale moving again, debts shifting under the surface, a storm building without thunder. In an old warehouse, a rival family met, arguing about boundaries, about old truces broken. One of them mentioned the girl, the witness, the napkin, and how she was still alive. That word spread like gasoline toward men who wanted chaos. Back at the hotel, Mira woke to the sound of silence, the kind that feels wrong. She read the note, her stomach twisted. She wanted to believe him, to stay still like he asked, but the walls pressed closer. She walked to the window, looked down at the street, saw a black car parked too long, two men inside pretending not to watch. She stepped back, heart racing. She searched for anything that could be used, a phone, data, key, a weapon. None. Downstairs, Vale met a contact from the docks, a woman named Lucia. She wore grief like perfume. She told him someone sold his location. 2 cops had been paid to track his license plates. He nodded, said nothing, his eyes colder than steel. Lucia asked if it was worth it, all this noise for one girl. He looked at her and said, some debts you do not choose, they choose you. When he returned to the hotel, the elevator doors opened to empty halls, the door of his room slightly ajar, a shadow moving inside. His pulse stayed slow. He entered with the quiet of a wolf. Mira gone, window open, curtain fluttering in the wind. He looked down, saw no body, no trace, only the black car gone into the crowd. He exhaled through his teeth, not anger, not fear, something deeper, the taste of inevitability. In a basement across town, Mira sat tied to a chair again, the air cold, the smell of oil familiar. The man in front of her wore a cheap suit, his smile borrowed. He said Vale could not protect anyone, not even his own blood. She did not respond. She had learned silence could wound deeper than words. He slapped her once for the effort, then turned away to make a call. She closed her eyes, listened, counted breaths, trying to remember the pattern of the rain outside. It helped her not to scream. Vale moved like a ghost through the alleyways, tracing the scent of betrayal. Every street name a prayer, every face a question. He found one of Hale's men in a diner, cornered him without effort. The man confessed before the coffee cooled, names, addresses, the warehouse near the river again. Always the river. Vale left money on the table out of habit, maybe respect, maybe mockery. Night returned fast, thunder rolling over the lake, lightning slicing the sky, the city wet again as if cleansing itself of guilt. Vale stood before the warehouse, same walls, same echoes, but tonight he was not alone. Lucia beside him, silent, pistol ready. They entered through the rear door, the sound swallowed by rain inside. The light flickered on chains hung from beams. The men at the table looked up. 2 late shots cracked like metal prayers. The echoes bounced off steel and silence. When it was done, only the rain spoke. Vale found Mira bound but alive, her eyes wide yet steady. She met his gaze and for the first time did not look afraid. He cut the rope, she stood swaying, and he caught her like a promise. Outside, the night breathed smoke, the sirens growing nearer. Lucia covered their retreat, the car waited, engine running. Vale helped Mira inside, his hands shaking for the first time in years. As they sped away, the skyline burned behind them, flashes of red and blue reflected on wet streets, the city bleeding light. Hale watched from his office window, listening to reports on the radio. He smiled thinly, said the family will tear itself apart before dawn, but deep inside, he knew better. Vale was not a man you corner, he was a man who learned to live inside corners. In the car, Mira stared at the reflection of flames in Vale's eyes. She whispered something about fate. He told her fate was just another name for a decision you already made. They drove until the lights faded and the road became black water stretching toward nowhere. The rain eased into mist, the city shrinking behind them. The world smelled of gunpowder and salvation. She closed her eyes, leaned her head against the seat, and for the first time in days her breathing matched the rhythm of the road. Vale glanced at her, saw the scar on her wrist from the tape, the bruise fading but memory permanent. He wondered if redemption ever came clean or if it always dripped in red. He said nothing. The horizon swallowed the car, the night waiting ahead patient, eternal. The dawn crawled over the horizon, painting the world in bruised gold. The road ahead empty, the river running beside them like a ribbon of ghosts. Vale had not slept in 2 nights, his hands steady, his eyes hollow. Mira beside him, wrapped in a borrowed coat, her head leaning against the glass, the city far behind them whispering through the radio static. Sirens fading into history. They stopped at an old church on the edge of the county, the kind built before the wars, where the wood still remembered prayers. Vale stepped out first, his boots sinking in the mud. The air smelled of rain and dust. He told her to wait. She followed anyway. Inside, the light fell through crack-stained glass, cutting the dust into colors that did not belong to earth. The altar stood bare except for a single candle flickering like a dying heart. Vale knelt not to pray but to remember the act itself, his body heavy, his breath slow. Mira watched from the doorway. She wanted to ask who he had been before all this, but the answer already lived in his silence. He pulled from his coat an envelope worn at the edges. Inside were photographs, a child with her mother's eyes, a woman holding her hand, both gone now, taken by the same machine he had built with his own hands. He looked at the pictures until they blurred, then placed them on the altar beside the candle. Mira approached the steps, her footsteps soft. She said his name. He turned his gaze, meeting hers, and in that moment something passed between them, not love, not pity, but recognition. 2 souls carved by loss. She told him she wanted to stop running. He said running was all that kept them alive. She shook her head, said then maybe life means something else. He smiled, the kind of smile that hurts because it remembers how to feel. Outside, Lucia waited by the car, watching the tree line. She saw movement, headlights distant, too slow for travelers, too deliberate. She called out, but the wind swallowed her voice. Vale heard the engine long before the sound reached them, instinct pulling him back into motion. He told Mira to stay low, then drew the pistol from his coat, the confession still open on the altar, the candle struggling against the draft. The black sedan rolled to a stop, figures stepping out, guns drawn, faces hidden by raincoats, men sent by hail or by another family. It no longer mattered. The church walls shook under the echo of gunfire, with splintered glass shattered. The air turned to thunder. Vale moved like a memory, precise and unforgiving. Lucia fired from the doorway, her bullets answering prayers no one had said. The pews burned, the candle died. When the noise settled, only the rain spoke again. Vale stood bleeding from his side, his coat dark with it, the pistol empty. He looked down at the men on the floor, each one a chapter closed. Lucia gone, fallen by the entrance, the smell of smoke thick enough to choke the dawn. Mira crawled to him, her hands trembling, trying to hold the wound. He told her to stop, his voice calm, softer than she had ever heard. He said every family has a code, every man has one confession left. She cried, told him not to leave, not now, not after all this. He placed his hand on hers, whispered without sound the words she could read from his lips, tell the truth even when no one believes you. Then he pressed something into her palm, the broken rosary, the one he carried since the beginning, a circle, incomplete, a promise unfinished. She stayed with him until the light filled the church, the rain turning to silver, his breath slowing until it vanished. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full of everything they could not say. She sat there long after the sirens came, the officers moving through the ruins asking questions she would never answer. Days later, the city buried its dead. Newspapers called it a gang war, the police called it a success. The world kept turning, forgetting names like dust in the rain. But in a small office near the river, a new foundation opened its door. A sign above it read, The Vale Trust for Missing Persons. Inside, on the wall behind the desk, a framed napkin stained by time, the ink faint but still legible. Next table, He kidnapped me. Don't react. Mira stood by the window watching the river move beneath the bridge, the same river that had taken everything and returned something else. She touched the rosary, now mended, the missing bead replaced with a piece of glass. From that church, she whispered, thank you, not to heaven but to the silence that had once saved her. She had learned that salvation wears many faces, some cruel, some kind, all temporary. The sky dimmed, clouds gathering for another rain. She smiled faintly, turned off the light, locked the door, and walked into the evening, her steps steady, her shadow long behind her. The city breathed its endless rhythm, the world unchanged except for one quiet story written on a napkin, carried by the current, forgotten by most, remembered by few, and somewhere beyond the noise a man named Vale rested in peace at last, his last confession made not with words, but with deeds. Thank you all for following this haunting journey of silence, loyalty, and redemption. If Myra's story moved you, her courage to reach out with nothing but a napkin and hope, tell us in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your support keeps these untold stories alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, so we can continue bringing you more powerful tales from the shadows. Because sometimes the smallest act of bravery can echo louder than 1,000 cries for help.